This is the 2014 North Carolina Supreme Court Candidates Forum, presented by the Wake Forest School of Law and the North Carolina Center for Voter Education. Moderating the forum is Suzanne Reynolds, Interim Dean of the Wake Forest School of Law.
Let me tell you about the format. This is a format suggested by North Carolina Voter Education, which is a wonderful organization for those of you who are voting in North Carolina. Go to their blog, ncvoterguide.org, provides such a useful public service, giving us information about our candidates. I recommend that website, and I recommend electncjudges.org. It's a website sponsored by the North Carolina Bar Association. It will have the videos of various forums. I don't know if it's going to be a video of this forum or not, but a number of the judicial candidates forums will be posted on electncjudges.org. So go there if you need further education after the forum today. We have 6 of the 8 candidates who are running for the 4 offices that are you voters are going to vote on in this election cycle, and I will describe them by the names of their seats, and then the either 1 or 2 candidates we have with us today who are running for that seat. The first seat is the Chief Justice seat, and for the Chief Justice seat, the candidates are Judge Ola Lewis, and I guess at this point you can just raise your hand. Judge Ola Lewis and Chief Justice Mark Martin. For the Martin seat, the candidates are Judge Sam Ervin IV and Justice Bob Hunter Jr. For the Hudson seat is Justice Robin Hudson, and her opponent I do not believe is here. I don't think we heard from Judge Eric Levinson. Was that Judge Levinson? I don't think so. It'd be the first time we've heard from him. For the Beasley seat, we have Justice Sherry Beasley, and the other candidate for that seat is not with us today. It's Mike Robinson of the Robinson and Loyne Law Firm. So let me describe the format for today. We will have opening statements by the candidates of 1.5 minutes, of 90 seconds opening. And I should stop now and introduce Brent Lawrence. Brent Lawrence is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Center for Voter Education, and he says he has time cards that will stop even me. I see some of my contract students, you know I'm a big talker, but he says he'll get me stopped. We'll have the opening statements of 1.5 minutes, and then we'll have questions by me. I have a question for each of the 2, in some instances 1 candidate for the seat. Same question for the 2 or 1 candidate for that seat, but I'll have 4 different questions, a different question for each seat, as it were, and the candidates will have a minute to respond. Then I'll go back through again. I'll have another question, 4 different questions, 1 question per seat. After that, we'll open it up to the audience for questions. It'll be you students. We're giving you first dibs, maybe the only dibs. The only questions come from the students. So write your questions on the card that you have, and at some point, turn in the card. In fact, the Dean's Fellow, Tony Misico, if you'll raise your card when you have it ready, Tony will come pick it up whenever it's ready. And then in the audience participation part, I'll read the cards and pick appropriate questions. I know that the candidates don't want questions that ask them to forecast how they would rule on any particular issue. That'd be a violation of the Code of Judicial Conduct, so I'll screen out any questions that ask them how they would rule on a particular issue. After we have about 25 minutes of questions and responses from the audience, each candidate will have a minute to close, and if I've done my math right, that gets us out in an hour. 60 minutes for the Candidates Forum. All right? Sound good? Well, let's start then with our openings, and we'll go seat by seat in alphabetical order. That means, Judge Lewis, I believe you're first up with a 1.5-minute opening statement. It'll be Judge Ola Lewis and Chief Justice Mark Martin for the Chief Justice seat.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ola Moselle Lewis. I was born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, graduated from Fayetteville State University, North Carolina Central University School of Law, where I finished law school in 1990 and passed the bar that same year. I have experience in the private practice of law as an assistant district attorney. In 1993, appointed the youngest district court judge in the state of North Carolina. Served as a special Superior Court judge from 2000 to 2002, and I have served as the senior resident Superior Court judge in beautiful Brunswick County since 2006, where I serve in the fair administration of justice as its leader for Brunswick County. We have created 5 therapeutic courts in Brunswick County. These therapeutic courts reduce the rate of recidivism, save taxpayers money, and restore families. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to serving as your next Chief Justice. My father, who was a command sergeant major in the United States Army, used to tell me that the time to show leadership was indeed before you became the leader. Our current Supreme Court is ranked one of the lowest in the nation, coming in at the rank of 50th, and I say to you that it is time for new leadership. Thank you.
Chief Justice Mark Martin.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Martin, and I first want to thank Dean Reynolds and everyone here at the law school for organizing the forum and also coming out this afternoon to hear from the candidates. It's an honor for me to serve as your Chief Justice. I have been doing so for about 1 month, and in addition have served on the Supreme Court for nearly 16 years. I've also served on the Court of Appeals and finally served on the Superior Court in District 3A. I'm the only judge in the state of North Carolina to have served on all 3 of those levels, and the only candidate in this race who's actually served on the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice should be a seasoned member of the court. There's so much that you learn as a new member, whether it's learning how to participate in the collaborative opinion drafting process or the petition process, where we actually determine which cases to order full briefing and argument, or the customs and traditions of the court, most of which are unwritten. Experience is critical when you're trying to lead a court. New members come to the court and look to your leadership to really be mentored and to grow into the job over time. Every statewide organization that has made a determination in this race has endorsed my candidacy, as well as 5 former Chief Justices of the Supreme Court. Those that know the job best have endorsed this candidacy, a bipartisan group. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for the Martin seat, Judge Sam Ervin IV.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, let me echo others in thanking Wake Forest and the Center for Voter Education for hosting this forum. It's always good to have an opportunity to come out and speak at law schools in particular, because y'all understand what we're talking about in ways that other audiences tend not to, and so I'm grateful for your willingness to participate today. As I said, my name is Sam Ervin IV. I'm a native of Morganton, which is about an hour and a half up I-40 from here. I'm a product of the public schools of Burke County. I went to Davidson undergrad, graduated magna cum laude, went to Harvard Law School, graduated cum laude from that institution. I hope you'll forgive me for not being from Wake Forest. In 1981, I passed the bar and practiced for the next 18 years almost in Morganton. The practice that I had was very general in nature. It included civil and criminal litigation, a hefty dose of work before the Utilities Commission, and a lot of appellate work. In 1999, Governor Hunt appointed me to serve on the Utilities Commission. The Utilities Commission, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is a quasi-judicial body that operates a lot like the Superior Court, sitting without a jury. So I wound up presiding over many controversial proceedings there. In 2008, I was elected to the Court of Appeals, and have served on that body since then. I believe that my experience makes me the best qualified candidate, and look forward to answering other questions and talking about my judicial philosophy further as we go along.
Thank you. Justice Hunter?
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Wake Forest University and the dean for welcoming us, and I'd like to thank all of you for showing up. When I was in law school, we had to study all the time, and I'm delighted that you can take this break from your studies to
They
listen
do
to a
too,
little
Justice
political
Hunter.
talk. I'm from Greensboro. I grew up in Greensboro, attended the public schools in Chapel Hill. I recently got an LLM degree from Duke University in judicial studies. Both Jimmy and I were elected to the Court of Appeals at the same time. He does a great job on the Court of Appeals, and I hope he stays there. He and I are good friends. We try to show young law students and others how campaigns should be run, and you won't see us attacking each other or saying bad things about each other. We both do a pretty good job. We have little different experiences. I'm 10 years older or so than him, and so I have about 10 years more experience, including being a professor or an adjunct professor here at the law school, where my good friend Mike Curtis and I taught a law of democracy for a couple of years. I try to be fair to all litigants who appear before me, and I change my clerks every year, so there are always openings for new law students. So that's all I have to say as an opening remarks, and I'd appreciate your support.
Thank you. For the Hudson seat, we have Justice Robin Hudson.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you to Wake Forest Law School and the Center for Voter Education for hosting this, and to all of you for being here. I am Justice Robin Hudson, and I have been serving on your state Supreme Court for the last 8 years since I was elected in 2006. With the retirement of Chief Justice Parker at the end of August, I'm now the highest-ranking woman in the entire state court system. Before serving on the Supreme Court, I served for 6 years on the Court of Appeals, and having been the first woman elected to the appellate level without having been appointed first in 2000. Before that, I practiced law for 25 years, handling cases of all kinds all over the state, at all levels of court, state and federal, and lots of appeals, including personally arguing in the Supreme Court more than 50 times. I can't think of a better way to put these 38 years of legal experience to constructive use than to continue working for the people of North Carolina, helping to solve the most complex and difficult legal issues that we face. I also have 2 grown children, both of whom teach 2nd grade in public schools, and I have a 1-year-old granddaughter, and I'm absolutely committed to doing whatever I can to make sure that our legal system going forward is the best it can possibly be for their future, as well as for yours and your children and grandchildren. I'd appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for the Beasley seat, Justice Sherry Beasley.
Good afternoon. I am Sherry Beasley, and I serve on the Supreme Court of North Carolina. And I, too, would like to thank Dean Reynolds and Wake Forest Law School and Center for Voter Education for hosting this forum, and thank each of you for being here. I've served on the Supreme Court now for almost 2 years, having been appointed in December of 2012. I was elected in 2008 along with Judge Irvin and Justice Hunter to the Court of Appeals. We were all elected at the same time, and Dean Reynolds was also on the ballot that very same year. I served on the North Carolina Court of Appeals for 4 years. I was appointed to the District Court in Cumberland County, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in 1999 by Governor Jim Hunt, and served on the District Court for 10 years, having been elected successfully twice there. In the in the District Court, I was presided in the Family Court. I was also a certified juvenile court judge. I presided in criminal court and civil court as well. And I do think that judicial experience is very important, given that the Supreme Court of North Carolina provides guidance to all the lower courts across the state as to what the rule of law is and how it should be applied. I am the only candidate in this race with any judicial experience at all. So I'd ask you to check out my website, justicesherrybeasley.com, for more information, and I do look forward to being here today and appreciate your support.
Thank you. Well, we'll start off with a question for the Chief Justice seat, and we'll go in reverse order. I think Judge Lewis introduced herself first, so I'll address this first to you, Chief Justice Martin. Most states do not elect their chief judge, do you think the chief judge of the state's highest appellate court should be elected? And why or why not?
Well, it's actually an excellent question. As you know, Dean, 22 states have direct public election for Supreme Court members or members of the highest court in that state. 16 jurisdictions use some variation of the Missouri plan, and the final 12 jurisdictions do not have a role for the electorate, so to speak. In a few states, the legislative branch picks the members. And the danger of actually electing a chief justice is that you could have a candidate who was not familiar with the appellate process or had not been an appellate judge or authored an appellate decision, or perhaps other lack of the requisite experience, actually coming in to lead a court when they had not authored a decision or otherwise participated in the process that occurs at the court. And so there are other models that are used in other states, but this is the situation we have here. And I think the goal for all of us as voters is to try to select who we believe would be the best qualified candidate.
Right. And I'll pose that same question to you, Judge Lewis. Do you think the chief judge of the state's highest appellate court should be elected, and why or why not?
It is the system that we have pursuant to our North Carolina Constitution. If it had not been for the electoral process, I would not be where I am today. And we need judges who are fair, impartial, and exercise judicial independence. The political process can be just that, a political process. My opponent has been endorsed by the Republican Party, our party. My opponent has been appointed by the governor, interim chief justice, and my opponent has had the benefit of the legislators reversing the order of the ballot in the fall. However, because you, the citizens of North Carolina, have a vote, and there is no requirement that one who served as Chief Justice first have any experience. In fact, our current Chief Justice, Roberts, never served one day on the Supreme Court before being appointed
Okay.
Chief Justice.
Thank you, Judge Lewis. All right, so we'll pose a question to Justice Hunter for the Martin seat. All of these races are nonpartisan races. The ballot will have no indication of your party affiliation. Does nonpartisan races have any meaning beyond just the absence of your party affiliation on the ballot?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely it does. The reason we went to nonpartisan elections is to try to scrub out the influence of political parties and party loyalty that judges would have. I'm not sure that we've been all that successful at it because all the candidates have been endorsed by one party or another. But really, the effect it is to stop the dilution of votes that come about through party primaries. One of the things that Professor Curtis and I used to teach here was vote dilution. And if you have a party primary system that goes about nominating people, somebody's vote invariably gets diluted in the nomination and election process. A nonpartisan system like we have for the judges is a much fairer system than a party primary system, in my view.
All right. Judge Irvin, does nonpartisan races have meaning beyond the absence of party affiliation on the ballot?
I think they should. I mean, my understanding of the intention that underlay the decision to go to nonpartisan elections was a recognition that judicial officials have fundamentally different jobs than legislators or executive branch officials. It is appropriate for a legislative candidate or a candidate for executive office to endorse a party platform, to say what he or she will do if elected in order to further that platform. That's the way our system of government in those two branches works. Judicial officials try to do something differently. Our job is not to try to sit there and figure out what policies we would implement. Our job is to look at what the law is, to attempt to apply the law as we understand it to the facts, recognizing that that's not always some kind of slot gadget, mechanistic kind of process. And the use of nonpartisan elections, it seems to me, reflects the nature of judicial office, and therefore it should, in fact, indicate to the public that judges do something different and that you ought to consider different things in selecting your judges.
Thank you. All right, a different question for the Hudson seat and Justice Hudson. What does the phrase judicial independence mean to you, and what do you think is the biggest threat to it?
Judicial independence means a lot of things to a lot of different people. To me, it means a couple things important. One, I think that our judges are supposed to be independent of the other branches. We have 3 co-equal branches of government. That means independent of the executive and the legislative branches. It also means independent of other influences. We've seen this year, in my race in particular, one of the potentially biggest threats to that by outside money. In my view, judges should be independent of money and of other special interests. And we saw in April that an outside group based in Washington that has a national plan to spend money in Supreme Court races all over the country spent $1.5 million on television ads, partly according to their own information, in order to get judges on Supreme Courts who are willing to help build a, quote, firewall around their legislative agenda. That is not our job. Our job is not to have an agenda. It's to be fair and impartial in accordance with our oath. And strictly adhering to our oath to administer justice without favoritism is judicial independence, in my view.
Thank you. And Justice Beasley, what is the most important issue in the race for this seat? This Beasley seat. What is the most important issue in this race?
But not issue before the court.
What's that?
But not issue before the court.
Not issue before the court.
Well, there are several important issues, but I think the defining characteristic between my opponent and me really has to be experience. I have almost 16 years of judicial experience, and the judicial experience really is important. The thought of one beginning one's judicial career on the Supreme Court of North Carolina just doesn't seem like it ought to be. The other piece too, I think as a collective, I think it is important to think about outside influences and the money that we know based on past performance as well as what we're hearing will be spent on all of these Supreme Court races. And there's real concern there. When there are those, whether they're partisan folks or corporations or other folks who believe that we ought to make our decisions based on something other than the rule of law, there's huge cause for concern there. And as voters, you really should be concerned about that and pay more attention to it.
Thank you. So we've heard from all of the candidates now. Now we'll go back through. I'll start back with the Chief Justice seat, and I think this one goes to you, Chief Justice Martin. Did we start with you?
I think it's.
Yes, it's Judge Lewis. You're exactly right. Judge Lewis, what does the phrase access to justice mean to you, and what role does the Chief Justice have in ensuring access to justice?
Well, access to justice has to deal with everyday, ordinary individuals being able to come before the courts with their concerns. And the North Carolina General Assembly has created a 3-judge panel, the first of its kind in these United States, to hear substantial issues of constitutional law, to determine whether or not a matter will even come before the courts. And the Chief Justice is responsible for appointing the judges who will sit on that 3-judge panel. I have been in circles where it has been said that legislators in Raleigh are tired of their agendas being overturned by liberal judges at the superior courts, and that was one of the reasons for this 3-judge panel.
Justice Martin, access to justice, what does that mean to you, and what role does, if any, does the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court have in that?
Simply stated, if we do not have access to justice for each and every North Carolinian, we have failed as a people. And access to justice cannot be predicated upon having the resources to hire the best attorney in town. We need to make sure that we have user-friendly courts all across the state that are user-friendly to every segment of the community. We need to make sure that we have programs in place to provide and supplement what legal resources can provide to the people of North Carolina. I am proud to share that I have already committed to attend the National Access to Justice Conference next year and fully intend to continue the work of Chief Justices Lake and Parker with the Chief Justice's Equal Access to Justice Commission. And it's amazing the progress we've made, and I look forward to partnering with law deans and other justice system stakeholders to make sure that we do all we can to meet this pressing problem.
For the Martin seat, and I believe this is yours, Judge Irvin, who are your judicial role models? And if you have any, why are they?
Well, this is, I know Justice Hunter thinks this is probably an unfair question. But
Oh, no, not at all.
My two judicial role models happen to be kin to me. One of them was my grandfather, who was a justice on the state Supreme Court for 6 years, and the other is my father, who was a Superior Court judge and a judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit for 19 years. The reason that I answer the question the way I do is simply because in my family we didn't have anything better to do than sit around and talk about what it was like being a judge sometimes. And I learned a lot from watching them and listening to them. The things I principally learned were, first of all, my father always emphasized the real people behind the cases, that we weren't just talking about some kind of academic problem, but rather had real impact on people. And my grandfather's significant emphasis, it seemed to me, was the equality of every citizen before the law, that the law ought to be applied equally to everybody. So as I said, that may be an unfair question in a sense, but those are my two favorite judges, and that's why they were my favorites.
Justice Hunter, how about your judicial role models? Do you have any? Who are they and why?
Well, I was just listening to my good friend answer that question, and I remember something that Oliver Wendell Holmes said about 3 generations. In any event, other than Oliver Wendell Holmes' comment about that, I like a judge called Albion Tourget, who's an obscure lawyer who wrote had a real role from Greensboro, who wrote the 1868 Constitution. I've always kind of liked Earl Warren in my old age. My dotage, I'm coming to like him more and more. I liked Hugo Black when he was on the Supreme Court a lot. So these, I don't know that they're role models. After you get to a certain age, you kind of stop having role models. But, you know, those are people who I've admired for their courage and their independence and the willingness to look beyond mere statutory, what I call Phariseeism, and deal with real problems.
Thank you. For the Hudson seat, Justice Hudson, how do you think justices to the state Supreme Court ought to be selected? And on that question, you can say whether it should be some kind of Missouri system, elected. If elected, should there be any limits on financing? If you could write the law, how would you select state Supreme Court justices?
That's a tough question because there are lots of possible ways to do it. And in most states, there's some kind of election. And as several people have said, the North Carolina Constitution provides that we elect our judges. And so it's very hard to change. So it's all a very nice theoretical exercise. I don't have necessarily a problem with the election of judges per se. I do have a problem with the outside money that has been unleashed by the United States Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. We did have a system in North Carolina with partial public financing that was in place for about a decade and around the country was thought of as a model for how to move away from having all of the big money in judicial politics. But because of Citizens United and another decision that said the rescue money was unconstitutional, it became not viable. I think probably some sort of hybrid where you have election or retention elections with maybe a nominating commission with representatives from various sectors of the bar and the public would be a better, if it could ever get passed.
All right. And Justice Beasley, describe the caseload and case types of the cases reaching the North Carolina Supreme Court and how your background prepares you to handle them?
Well, the case load is that people petition the court for the most part to ask us to hear their cases, and or we are required by the statute to hear cases where there's been a dissent at the Court of Appeals. We also hear rate utility cases. And our caseload is dependent upon oral arguments, the many, many, many petitions filed, and we don't just do a cursory review of those. We do comb through those petitions as well as the records below in the Court of Appeals, if applicable, and at the trial court level as well, or if there's another agency involved. And so I'm prepared because I have served, yes, on the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and then, of course, we also write opinions. And then I've served on the North Carolina Court of Appeals for 4 years, where, of course, there are lots of appeals because for most cases, it is an appeal. The court is an appeals court of right. So we handle a lot of cases there. And then, of course, as a district court judge, I was in trial every day and heard hundreds of cases, often per week, about making decisions about families and small businesses and children every single day.
Okay, thank you, Justice Beasley.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. All right, I have some questions from the audience, and I think I'll try if we think we have enough. I'll give a different one to each seat. And now I believe we start back with Chief Justice Martin. What principle or principles do you believe are most fundamental to our state constitution and why?
Well, a big distinction, a major distinction between our state constitution on the one hand and the United States Constitution on the other is that our state constitution, Article 1, are fundamental principles that have been carried forward over time. And in many instances, these principles could be construed as more expansive, granting more rights to the citizens of the state than under the United States Constitution. And so, for instance, our legislative branch is Article 2 in the state constitution, and then Article 3 is executive, Article 4 is judicial. And I think that you have several themes in this constitution that can be construed and interpreted in ways other than the minimum standards required by the federal courts in the United States Constitution. And I think there's a lot of theories of construction that would encourage state Supreme Court justices to do just that. And so we encourage lawyers to include state constitutional grounds in their civil complaints and then carry that forward to
Right.
the appellate review.
Thank you. Judge Lewis, what principle or principles do you believe are most fundamental to our state constitution and why?
I believe in Article 4, the independent judiciary is very, very important and fundamental to the way that we do business as a state judiciary. It is imperative that the North Carolina Supreme Court act as an independent judiciary and not a political arm of a political party. And I strongly believe that the reason my opponent was appointed interim Chief Justice in an effort to stack the deck against the citizens of the state of North Carolina is because he was appointed to do the bidding of the executive and legislative branches of our government.
All right, I have,
Can we get rebuttal?
No?
it can be in your closing. How about that? Justice Hunter, I think this one's for you first. With the new law authorizing direct appeal to the Supreme Court, North Carolina Supreme Court, of any final judgment of the North Carolina Business Court, do you expect the Supreme Court docket to increase significantly?
I think that that's one of the things that can increase the docket. As someone who's a great admirer of our current Chief Justice, he has a plan to increase the number of cases that we're going to hear, and we're busy implementing that program. and I don't think he's been asked to do that by anybody. So I feel very strongly that we're going to have a increasing docket for a number of reasons. I think there's that. I think there's the Constitutional Court that Judge Lewis talked about and getting those decisions up. And we're going to be aggressively seeking opportunities at the Court of Appeals to look at other cases. Having said that, we also have got a great backlog of Racial Justice Act cases and death penalty cases that can come down the pike at any time. So I think the docket's going to increase for a number of reasons.
Judge Irvin, do you expect the Supreme Court docket to increase significantly because of the new law authorizing direct appeals to the Supreme Court from any final judgment of the North Carolina Business Court?
Of course, those appeals have been coming to the Court of Appeals now. Anecdotally, I've not sat down and done an exact count of how many appeals we've had taken from the Business Court to the Court of Appeals, but there certainly are some. Whether it would produce a substantial increase in the workload of the court, I think remains to be seen. Another facet of the answer to that question is what types of cases are we talking about? Many of the cases that I've seen coming from the Business Court at the Court of Appeals have been discovery-related matters and things like that that don't involve highly complex contractual or business-related issues, but instead involve more civil procedure issues. How the Supreme Court chooses to deal with those cases, I think, remains to be seen. As Justice Hunter said, there appears to be a recognition across the board that the Supreme Court needs to decide more cases on the merit. That's certainly something that I'm sympathetic with, and I think the change in the law may have some impact on that, but there are other factors that need to be taken into account in evaluating the court's current workload as well.
Okay. Justice Hudson, we have good students here. They know their law, so they're asking you a tough one. When a federal court decides a case involving an unsettled issue of state law where precedent is non-existent or contradictory, they typically have the option to certify the issue to the highest state court to ask how that court would rule. Every state in the United States, except North Carolina, has a certification procedure. Are you in favor of a certification procedure in North Carolina?
Well, it is true that North Carolina does not have that procedure, and this is not a dead topic. It comes up from time to time for discussion in our court, and since it's an issue that is likely to come before the court again in the next year or two, it's probably not something on which I should comment substantively.
All right. All right, Justice Beasley, do you think that North Carolina should move away from election for judges to increase judicial independence? It's really the same question I asked Justice Hudson, isn't it? Do you think that North Carolina should move away from election for judges to increase judicial independence?
You know, I told you that I was initially appointed to the district court, subsequently elected twice. I was not appointed to the Court of Appeals. I was elected outright, and then I was appointed to the Supreme Court of North Carolina. And you know, there's something, obviously if you're appointed, it's a great thing, but when you're not, the election system really does provide an opportunity for people to offer themselves for service in this way. But I have to say, in the very same way that Justice Hudson mentioned, I think the greater issue is the outside money being poured into these elections. And when you think about the fact that the role of a judge is to be fair and impartial, and to hear the cases and decide the cases based on the law, the influence of money, and we're hearing millions of dollars will be spent in the fall on these races, and money is spent when people expect a certain outcome in the cases which come before us. That's troubling.
So we'll have more questions. If you have, Tony Misico, raise your hand if you want to hand in a question. He's right here. But I'm going to continue with some of the extra questions that I have. So this goes back to Judge Lewis. Judge Lewis, what do you think can and should be done about the high rates of incarceration in this country?
Well, I have a brother serving 20 to 25 years as a habitual felon in the state penitentiary. I often tell young people who come before me in court that the same woman who raised a Superior Court judge has raised a habitual felon. His addiction started with a little bit of marijuana between friends and evolved into a life of crime and addiction. And I believe that it was my brother's involvement with the criminal justice system that caused me to create the 5 therapeutic courts in Brunswick County. Again, therapeutic courts are proven effective, reducing the rate of recidivism. And I would like to bring therapeutic courts statewide, especially for our veterans who have so honorably served. We run these courts on $600,000 worth of federal grants.
Thank you. Chief Justice Martin, what do you think can and should be done about the high rates of incarceration in this country?
One thing we all know is the nexus between crime and mental health and crime and substance abuse. And so my administration of justice plan provides for cultivating an atmosphere where mental health courts can be conducted around the state. We currently have several de facto mental health courts in Orange County and Charlotte area and in other areas where we're trying to bring them online. I have, within the American Bar Association, worked on trying to develop a paradigm of what type of therapeutic courts can be most effective. And right now, as we evaluate the budget for next year, what we're really trying to figure out is where we can, whether we have the resources for a lot of these courts, whether they be drug courts, family courts, veteran courts, or mental health courts, to make sure that we match that type of court in a region of the state where we can get full utilization and hopefully lead to reductions in confinement.
This is for Judge Irvin. Do you feel the war on drugs has been effective or not?
Well, and I'm going to answer in a way similar to Justice Hudson. My view has always been that the role of the judge was to take the law as it exists and to try to fairly and impartially apply the legal principles that we have to the facts. This is my 3rd campaign for judicial office, and I have decided over the course of those campaigns that it is not generally a good idea for judicial candidates to comment on what are, as practical matter, public policy issues. The extent to which the General Assembly chooses to criminalize conduct involving substances is a question for the General Assembly. The courts have no alternative except to attempt to try to apply the laws that are made by the General Assembly fairly. I have felt pretty consistently that if judges started commenting on what the General Assembly ought to be doing about substantive policy matters, it would create an impression that that judge might or might not in some circumstances be able to fairly and impartially decide cases. So I have pretty consistently declined to answer questions like that, and I believe I will continue to be
All
consistent.
right.
So I'm openly telling you, I guess I'm not answering.
How about you, Justice Hunter? Do you feel any freer to answer that question? Or if you don't, do you want to tell us why you don't? Do you feel the war on drugs has been effective or ineffective?
Well, I'd like to be just as difficult as Judge Irvin can be. I won't shy from that role. I will say I don't know the answer to that question, even if I was inclined to answer it. I don't know the answer. I'll tell you what it's like to be an appellate judge, though, for just a minute, and read the dreary stories that come before us in these cases of human beings who have wasted their lives. It is, I mean, I cannot tell you the worst part of my job, by far, is reading the dreary stories of human beings who, for crack cocaine or substance abuse violations, are sentenced to an enormous amount of time. I think the General Assembly has made positive steps in the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act in trying to minimize incarceration, but it's a huge problem, and I hope they solve it.
Thank you. Justice Hudson, how about describing an ethical dilemma you have faced in your professional life and how you resolved it?
An ethical dilemma. Well, there are different kinds of ethical dilemmas that come up in law practice and in the court service. And since I practiced law for 25 years, there were issues that come up from time to time where you are conflicted out you can't represent somebody because of a conflict where, you know, your husband represents the other side or something like that. Those kind of things are pretty easy. The ones on the court that were easy ones is when I first got to the Supreme Court, I was not able to serve on cases where I had been on the panel at the Court of Appeals, obviously, and the case was coming up to the Supreme Court. There are trickier ones that come up now when we talk about whether we should recuse in cases where a group has endorsed us and is appearing in the case. If they're a party, that it gets easier. If they're not, sometimes there are fine lines that we have to sort of sort through. Most of us, I think, are inclined to not recuse unless there is a real compelling reason to do so, because we know that we can set aside any sort of appearances except in those situations where we're specifically required to recuse. But we try.
Thank you. Justice Beasley, what do you believe to be the root causes for the high numbers of juvenile offenders, and is there anything the court system can do to reduce these numbers?
Not as excited about being as difficult as Judge Irvin as Justice Hunter is. I do think that it really is a policy consideration. That I was a trial judge in a place where, in Fayetteville, which there's a military base in the area, and the population is just unique. There are lots of veterans there, service members and their families, and oftentimes when the service member is away, the families either make the decision to stay in town or they leave town so that they can be closer to their families while the service member's away. I think there can be a host of situations. What I will tell you that is, as a trial court judge, I saw a lot of families who were in turmoil, where there was lots of substance abuse. And what was even sadder, I think, is that often you would find a family that was in family court, juvenile court, criminal court, and civil court, all for the same sort of interconnected reasons. And so, as to the policy considerations, that's a little difficult to address, but I have seen a lot of it.
All right, I'll ask one final question. I'm gonna change the format. I think I see him sitting out there whose question this is. But you may answer if you wish. How about that? Do you find the political philosophy of Aristotle or Rousseau more credible, and why? I'm not going to pose that to the candidates for each seat. I'm just throwing it out there.
I'll be happy to answer that
All
question.
right.
Yes.
Thank you, Justice Hunt.
Yes, I
All say ye yes? Is it unanimous? The yes?
And maybe out of an abundance of caution, I should say no.
We have a split.
My professors at Davidson would probably be unhappy with me.
Well, I think we'll give you closing statements now, but how about a minute, 15 seconds? I think we've got that. And let's maybe start in reverse order. We'll start with Justice Beasley, a closing statement.
Again, thank you so much for having us here this afternoon. I hope that you are fully aware that these elections are very, very important, that you've got a really big decision to make about who's going to serve on your Supreme Court for the next 8 years. I hope that you will become aware of who we are as people. I've worked in the community in addition to my judicial experience. I'm married to Curtis for 21 years. I have twin sons who are 13 years old and high school freshmen. And I've worked a lot as a lecturer for North Carolina Central's Law School as well as Carolina's Law School in teaching trial ad as well as appellate advocacy. But these elections really are hugely important. There is a lot at stake. Justice is at stake. And so I hope that you'll be thoughtful in making your decisions and help to educate other people, because even though we are elected, so many people have no idea that we exist, that we are elected, and that we are counting on them to make the right decisions. So I'm very, very honored to be here today. Thank you.
Justice Hudson.
Thank you. These races are very important for a couple of reasons. The Supreme Court has 7 seats, and we are the last word in North Carolina on the issues that are closest to the people, the issues that affect your jobs and your property and your families and your safety. So that's important. It's also important because of the role we play in our three-branch system of government and helping provide checks and balances. I think there are 7 seats because we want the court to reflect the diversity of our population and a variety of ideas. These races are nonpartisan on the ballot, and I hope that you will educate yourselves about the seats and about the candidates. I also have a bipartisan bunch of endorsements from groups and individuals all over the state. I urge you to pick up flyers such as these and the one from the Center for Voter Education in the back of the room with more detailed information. If elected, I promise to work only as hard as I can to continue to try to get it right for the people of North Carolina, and I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Judge Irvin.
Again, thank you for the chance to spend some time with you this afternoon. It's an honor to be here and an honor to have so many of you come. Ultimately, what you're doing in these races is electing people to serve as judges. And it seems to me, fundamentally, we need to keep in mind what judges do. Courts really do 2 things. They decide disputes, and they make sure that the other branches of government remain within proper constitutional bounds. We've heard some allusion to this earlier, but let me join the chorus with respect to one subject, which is the importance of judicial independence. Neither of the 2 functions that I outlined can be performed except by an independent judiciary. Judges should not have a political or ideological agenda because it's not appropriate for members of courts to attempt to effectuate it. My judicial philosophy is pretty simple. Figure out what the facts are, figure out what the law is as best you can, and try to fairly and dispassionately apply the law to the facts in a manner that's consistent with the purpose behind those legal principles. I have no political or ideological agenda. I've been very privileged to serve the citizens of this state for the last nearly 15 years, and I would very much appreciate your support in the race that I'm involved in for Justice of the Supreme Court. I will now turn it over to my friend Justice Hunter and let him make his closing statement.
I always feel that when we go to answer a question about this, we kind of like the old beer commercial, less filling tastes great. And we articulate 2 sides of a coin. Let me talk to you about my view of the coin. My view of the coin is we do all the things that Judge Irvin has just talked about, but it's also important that we be fair to people at the end, and that we interpret statutes and laws so they're consistent with the values that are put in the Constitution. And I think that the difference between us is that we have a difference in experience. I litigated the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause a little bit more than Judge Irvin did, and he might be more statutorily driven from his experience at the Utilities Commission, which I have not equaled, nor do I care to equal. But I want to just say that my overall concern for any decision that a court I'm on comes out with is if the litigants have been treated fairly and if the result is one that is fair to the parties.
Judge Lewis.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I really thank God for that opportunity. And 2 words I'll leave you with: unbossed and unbought, as Shirley Chisholm would say. I am the independent candidate in this election. I have experience all over the court system, from a defense attorney in private practice to an assistant district attorney, district court judge, superior court judge. I have even been a litigant where I sued someone over a Facebook post, Lewis v. Rapp, one of the first cases in the state of North Carolina where a public official actually won a liable per se case. And I want you to know that this North Carolina Supreme Court needs to work harder. And we will work harder under my leadership. And I look forward to going to the conference that Justice Martin was speaking of, as presumptuous as it sounded. Ladies and gentlemen, I say to you that I need your prayers, your support, and your vote. Visit my website at www.votejudgeola.com. The GOP lineup is all male, but you can make a difference.
Thank you. Chief Justice Martin.
fairness, impartiality, independence, the uniform application of the law. Those are the principles that I've devoted nearly 22 years of my professional career as a jurist in this state. I've served on the trial court, I've served on the intermediate appellate court, I've served on the Supreme Court, and I'm the only candidate in this race who has authored an appellate decision. I've authored over 400. I'm the only candidate in this race who has participated in an appellate determination, and I participated in thousands during a nearly 20-year career on the appellate courts. That is precisely why 5 former Chief Justices of both political parties have all endorsed one of the 2 candidates. That is precisely why every statewide organization, whether it's been the teachers, the NCAE, the trial lawyers, known as the Advocates for Justice, or their corollary for the defense attorneys, the Association of Defense Attorneys, have all uniformly endorsed one candidate. We know from our own life experiences that experience matters. You can't lead a court, you can't lead an organization if you're not familiar with how it runs. And so I would respectfully ask for your support in this election, and working together, let's help inform people about these elections, and let's elect the best qualified people for these offices. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you, and thanks to all of you. You really need to educate people about these races. These are the down ballot candidates, not only literally. They'll be some of the last candidates on the ballot in November, but in the eyes of the public, they're way down ballot. The candidates, the voters don't know. Help educate them. Great resources, ncvoterguide.org, electncjudges.org. We have wonderful candidates. It's a very important position, and people should get educated and then vote. So let's go. Let's do it. Well, thanks to all of you. We're going to have a reception, so you'll be able to ask them, I bet ask them a few more questions. I don't think they all have to dash off quite yet, so meet and greet our candidates and have some refreshments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been the 2014 North Carolina Supreme Court Candidates Forum, presented by the Wake Forest School of Law and the North Carolina Center for Voter Education. To learn more about these and other candidates, please visit ncvoterguide.org.